If you saw The Magnificent Seven in a theater in 1960, you were watching seven men who felt indestructible. The wide hats, the quiet walk into town, the kind of courage that didn't need to raise its voice. 66 years later, all seven of them are gone. Some lived long, quiet lives surrounded by family. One died in a Mexican clinic under a false name, chasing a cure no doctor believed in. One carried his wife's ashes in a walking cane for 13 years, and one saved Frank Sinatra's life in the Pacific Ocean and was never publicly thanked for it. Tonight, we're going to walk through all seven of them, one at a time, and let you decide which story stays with you the longest. He was the reason the poster worked at all, the shaved head, the black clothes against the desert. A stillness that made every other actor in the frame look like they were trying too hard. Yul Brynner played Chris Adams as a man who had already proven everything he needed to prove. Off-screen, his own life had far more turns in it than the character ever did. He was born in 1920 in the Russian port city of Vladivostok, into a family whose fortune, built on silver mining, was seized by the Red Army before he turned 3. His childhood moved through Russia, China, and France. As a teenager, he spent a year in a Swiss clinic being treated for opium addiction. By the time he reached America in his early 20s, he was already fluent in 11 languages. Broadway made him a phenomenon before Hollywood did. He played the King of Siam in The King and I more than 4,000 times on stage, and the film version won him an Academy Award in 1956. For the 3 decades that followed, he fought a quiet battle against being seen as anyone else. He married 4 times and in the end left his entire estate to his 4th wife, a ballerina named Kathy Lee, leaving his 5 children out of the will entirely. In September of 1983, just hours before what would have been his 4,000th performance as the King, doctors told him his lung cancer was inoperable. He performed anyway. His final stage bow came in June of 1985, performance number 4,633. He died that October at 65 years old in a New York hospital. Months before his death, he had recorded an interview for American television. After he passed, the American Cancer Society turned it into a 30-second public service message. It opens on his gravestone. Then his face fills the screen, and he says the sentence that would outlive him: "Do not smoke." His ashes were laid to rest at a small Russian Orthodox monastery in the French countryside, a resting place about as far from a Hollywood soundstage as a man could choose. His story doesn't start in Hollywood. It starts on a Navy troop ship in 1949, and it starts with a mistake nobody bothered to explain to him. Steve McQueen was given only a handful of lines in the original script for The Magnificent Seven, and he spent the entire production quietly trying to steal every scene he was in anyway. He'd flip a coin during Yul Brynner's speeches. He'd rattle shotgun shells. Brynner, by most accounts, eventually assigned someone the specific job of counting how many times McQueen touched the brim of his hat while Brynner was talking. He was 30 years old at the premiere, and he had already lived through more than most men twice his age. His father left before he was born. His mother handed him off to relatives in Missouri. A stepfather beat him. By 14, he'd been sent to a reform school in California. By 17, he was in the Marines, and as punishment for going AWOL once, he was assigned to strip asbestos lagging from pipes on a troop ship. Nobody told him what asbestos was. Those fibers would be part of what killed him 3 decades later. After this film, he became one of the most famous men alive: The Great Escape, Bullet, Papillon. By the mid-1970s, he was the highest-paid actor in the world. His name turned up, unwanted, on a list connected to the Manson family. He had been expected at Sharon Tate's house the night of the murders, and only avoided it because he stopped somewhere else for a drink. He carried a gun for the rest of his life after that. Late in 1978, a cough that wouldn't go away turned into a diagnosis American doctors called untreatable, plural mesothelioma. He refused to accept that answer. He crossed the border into Mexico, seeking treatments American medicine wouldn't offer him. In November of 1980, he checked into a clinic under a false name for surgery doctors back home had called impossible. The operation was reported a success. 12 hours later, in the early morning hours, his heart simply stopped while he slept. He was 50 years old. His ashes were scattered over the Pacific. He crossed the border into Mexico, seeking treatments American medicine wouldn't offer him. In November of 1980, he checked into a clinic under a false name for surgery doctors back home had called impossible. The operation was reported a success. 12 hours later, in the early morning hours, his heart simply stopped while he slept. He was 50 years old. His ashes were scattered over the Pacific. Before there was a movie star, there was a 16-year-old boy working a Pennsylvania coal mine for $1 a ton. Charles Bronson played Bernardo O'Reilly, the gunfighter who quietly falls in with the village children. There's a moment in the film where the boys accuse him of cowardice for fighting only for money, and his voice catches as he tells them their fathers carry a heavier weight than any man with a gun ever will. It's the scene people remember most, and it wasn't far from the truth of his own upbringing. He was born Charles Buchinski, the 11th of 15 children, to Lithuanian immigrant coal mining parents in a house where English wasn't spoken until he started school. His father died when he was 10. By 16, he was underground himself. The Second World War pulled him out. He flew 25 combat missions as a tail gunner over the Pacific and came home with a Purple Heart and the GI Bill, which he used to study art. A director advised him to change his last name during the McCarthy era, since Buchinski read as suspiciously Eastern European to the wrong people. He became Bronson. American studios mostly overlooked him through the 1960s. It took Europe and a film with Sergio Leone to finally make him a star. By the early 70s, he was the highest-paid actor on the planet. He married 3 times, but the marriage that shaped him was his second, to actress Jill Ireland. They made 15 films together and raised their family on a 400-acre farm in Vermont. When Jill died of breast cancer in 1990, something in Bronson never recovered. He had her cremated and carried her ashes with him every day, inside a hollow walking cane, for the next 13 years. His own health began failing after a hip fracture in 1998, followed by Alzheimer's disease. He died in Los Angeles in August of 2003 at 81. His family brought him home to Vermont. His grave faces a mountain, marked with lines from a poem that begins, "Do not stand at my grave and weep." Buried with him, inside the stone, is the cane that once held his wife. If that detail is the one that's staying with you right now, tell us in the comments which cast member's ending hit you the hardest. It's always worth reading what people say. Every hero needs someone worth being afraid of, and in this film, that job belonged to Eli Wallach. He played Calvera, the bandit chief who terrorizes the village, but does it with a smile, a philosophical streak, and something close to charm. It remains one of the most human villains ever put on screen. Wallach was born in Brooklyn in 1915, the son of Polish-Jewish immigrants, and grew up along the docks of Red Hook, absorbing the accents that would serve his acting for decades. He served as an army medic during World War II, then became one of the founding members of the Actors Studio, the same circle that produced Marlon Brando. It was there he met Anne Jackson, whom he married in 1948. In 1953, he was offered the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity and turned it down to do a play with Elia Kazan instead. That part went to Frank Sinatra, who used it to revive his career and win an Oscar. Wallach always said he never regretted the choice. He also, by most accounts, never quite forgot it either. His marriage to Ann Jackson lasted 66 years. Their children later said they sometimes couldn't tell whether their parents were rehearsing a Tennessee Williams scene or having a genuine argument. Either way, the two of them always made up within minutes. A stroke in 2008 left him blind in one eye. He kept working. In 2010, at 94 years old, his son told reporters the best way to honor him was simply to put on one of his films. Some performances are remembered for a monologue. His is remembered for less than 2 minutes of near silence. James Coburn played Britt, the knife-throwing gunfighter who joins the Seven for no reason except the challenge itself. In the scene that made him a star, a cocky gunman insists on a contest. The knife flies, the man falls, and Britt simply walks away. Coburn built the entire character on stillness. Born in Nebraska in 1928 to a family whose auto garage had gone under in the Depression, he served during the Korean War era and studied under Stella Adler in New York. A close friendship with Bruce Lee defined much of the next decade of his life. When Lee died suddenly in 1973, Coburn carried his coffin. In the 1980s, severe rheumatoid arthritis began twisting his hands into shapes they could no longer straighten. Hollywood mostly forgot about him for the better part of 10 years. But in 1999, after 4 decades in the business, he won his only Academy Award, Best Supporting Actor, for playing a violent, alcoholic father in Affliction. His hands were so swollen that night, he could barely close them around the statue. He married twice. His second marriage, to actress Paula Murad, lasted until his death. On a November evening in 2002, he suffered a heart attack at home in Beverly Hills. Paula later said he died in her arms while the two of them were listening to music together. He was 74. The youngest gunfighter in the cast was also the only one whose character chose to stay behind when the others rode away. Horst Buchholz played Chico, restless, hungry, desperate to prove he belonged among the Seven. He was a German actor working in his second language, and at 26, he was already a major star across Europe. Born in Berlin in 1933, he never knew his biological father and took his stepfather's surname instead. During the war, he was evacuated to escape the Allied bombing of the city, ended up in a foster home in Czechoslovakia, and, as a teenager, walked himself back home to Berlin. By 1957, the German press had already started calling him the German James Dean. He turned down both Lawrence of Arabia and a follow-up film with the same director. Both roles went instead to Peter O'Toole, and the decision quietly closed the door on a bigger American career. He married French actress Miriam Bru in 1958 and stayed married to her for 45 years. In an unusual arrangement, she lived in Paris while he refused to leave Berlin, the city where his life had actually taken root. In February of 2003, he fractured his hip and went in for surgery in Berlin. The operation itself went well, but he developed pneumonia during recovery and died unexpectedly in early March at 69. Friends said they'd been told he was recovering. He's buried in the same city he walked home to as a teenage refugee. If you're still with us, this is the moment to hit subscribe, because the next name on this list held a doctorate, wrote a book still taught in American law schools, and outlived every other gunfighter in the cast. He played the one gunfighter who couldn't hide his fear. Off-screen, he may have been the sharpest mind in the entire cast. Robert Vaughn played Lee, a well-dressed gunslinger running from the law and from his own unraveling nerve. In the film's most honest scene, a drunk and exhausted Lee confesses to 2 farmers that his hands shake every time he draws his weapon. Vaughn was 27 at the premiere, the youngest of the 7 by a matter of months. Raised in Minneapolis after his parents divorced, he studied journalism before moving to Los Angeles. An Oscar nomination for the Young Philadelphians in 1959 led directly into this film the following year. Here's the detail that reframes the rest of his story. While starring as secret agent Napoleon Solo on the massively popular television series The Man from UNC Lee, a role that made him famous to a global audience, Vaughn was simultaneously working toward a doctorate at USC. His dissertation topic was the Hollywood blacklist. He earned his PhD in 1970, and the dissertation became a published book that's still assigned in American law schools today. He married actress Linda Staub in 1974 and stayed married to her for 42 years, raising 2 adopted children in Connecticut. Diagnosed with acute leukemia in late 2016, he died at home that November, surrounded by family at 83, the last surviving member of the 7 gunfighters. The last name on this list is the one most people forget. His real life makes that forgetting hard to justify. Brad Dexter played Harry Luck, the cynical gunfighter convinced Chris was hiding a bigger reward than he'd admitted to. Harry spends the whole film chasing gold that was never really there, and dies still asking about it with a faint smile in Chris's arms. He was 43 at the premiere, the oldest of the 7. Born Boris Milanovic in Nevada in 1917 to Serbian immigrant parents, Serbian was his first language. He trained at the Pasadena Playhouse and worked in radio before John Huston cast him, under a new name, in The Asphalt Jungle in 1950. Of all 7 gunfighters, Dexter was the only one who never quite broke through as a leading man. He told a reporter in the mid-1960s that acting frustrated him because an actor had no real control over his own career, so he moved into producing instead, including a film that earned 5 Academy Award nominations in 1972. His personal life read like its own screenplay. He was briefly married to singer Peggy Lee. Marilyn Monroe considered him a close friend, and he tried, unsuccessfully, to talk her out of divorcing Joe DiMaggio. But the moment that defines him happened on a beach in Hawaii in 1964. Frank Sinatra and another swimmer were caught in a riptide and pulled out to sea. Dexter swam out after them and stayed in the water for 45 minutes, at one point hearing Sinatra murmur that he thought he was going to die. 2 surfers eventually helped Dexter bring both of them back to shore alive. The Red Cross awarded him a medal for it. A grateful Sinatra made him vice president of his own company. 3 years later, Dexter advised Sinatra against marrying a 20-year-old Mia Farrow. Sinatra cut him off completely and never publicly thanked him for the rescue again. Brad Dexter died in California in 2002 at 85. He's buried in the same cemetery as Frank Sinatra, about 100 yards from the man whose life he once saved in the water. 7 gunfighters rode into a village in 1960 to save people who couldn't save themselves. 66 years later, every one of them is gone, scattered across the Pacific Ocean, resting on a French hillside, buried on a Vermont farm, laid to rest in a Berlin churchyard, and lying in a California desert 100 yards from Frank Sinatra. They played men who didn't need to explain their courage. Off-screen, it turns out, most of them never really got the chance to either.
Which one of these 7 stayed with you tonight? Tell us in the comments. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because we've got more of them coming.